Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. Not too long ago, I made a video on the modern myth mistake. That video was about how a lot of people complaining about the death of storytelling in Western culture cite as a cause of that decay the loss of a sense of modern myth in our storytelling. I disagree with this conclusion because I believe the people who have taken over our storytelling franchises, our Star Wars, our X-Men, our Avengers, are people who are trying to build their own mythology around a completely different set of values and principles than what the original Western mythology was built on. Those values do seem to discourage good storytelling, but we aren't seeing a decline in storytelling because we have lost a sense of the mythic tradition. We have lost the quality of our storytelling because the values underpinning our storytelling are unsuited to good stories. Of course, I say "are" here in the sense of our broad culture, not necessarily values that everyone discussing this topic clings to. In fact, the opposite is often the case. My point is that while the discussion is often about politics versus moral truth, if we really want to solve this problem, we have to engage with the question on the level of competing systems of moral truth. The original Western canon was built on ideas of truth, of grace, of ethical behavior, and self-improvement. The modern canon is built on a foundation of identity, of power dynamics, of the downtrodden, and activism on their behalf. If then it is our desire to save our storytelling tradition, or at least to rebuild it, how do we go about showing audiences that the moral foundations of our mythology is better than the moral foundations of the opposing mythology? It's my opinion that the best thing to do will be to find the thing that progressive mythology cannot do, or is at least the worst at doing, and then offering that as a central part of our own mythology. The greatest weakness of progressive mythology, in my opinion, is that it is built on the individual identity, and then the power dynamics that relate that identity to everyone else, and activism on behalf of those identities. In other words, all these factors that form the moral underpinning are weakest when viewed as a whole. They have the opposite of synergy. I'm not sure if there's a term for that, but that's what I think they have. So I just did a search, and apparently dysergy is a word that is the opposite of synergy. But in a more general sense, the consensus seems to be discord, dissent, or strife, which, seems to fit it to a T. So there you go, pick your antonym of choice. Now, the broad general reason for this is the intersectionality idea that has taken over progressive thought in the last 50 years or so. The notion that you personally are a bunch of identities which are more or less oppressed or more or less oppress others is the foundation of this intersectionality. And understanding all of these different power dynamics is the key to understanding yourself and deciding how you have to be an activist and create the moral change that the progressive mythology demands of you. All these different intersecting and conflicting identities require constant scrutiny and assessment and quote-unquote education to understand and serve as a series of moral levers that other people can use to affect your actions and outlooks. A person in the progressive moral schema is constantly doing the work in an attempt to understand the world around them and how their identities are supposed to mesh with it. It is, in a word, exhausting. You hear people use this word constantly. They are constantly exhausted. They are constantly tired. They are constantly worn down. Their stories reflect this. In fact, many people who focus on countering progressive media will talk about how it gets very boring and tedious to constantly interact with it, because it tends to rehash the same ideas over and over again. The people who make it are terrified that the intersections of identities will have changed and force them to completely reassess all the basic questions of their ideology all over again in the story format. And this is true. Look at something like Batwoman to Gotham Knights. I'm not an expert on these two series. In fact, I haven't engaged with them at all, but I know that we went from having a series that was about lesbians to a series that went to great lengths to introduce trans characters to its narrative. Why? Well, a new intersection of identity, power, and oppression had been added to the progressive matrix, and the storytelling of Gotham Knights had to incorporate it in order to present that part of the moral foundation of the mythology correctly. Incidentally, this is why I'm not on the modern mythology treadmill here. I don't spend a lot of time talking about progressive media because I recognize this feedback loop that is going to be locked in. I think there is some importance in constantly critiquing it. After all, people are forever coming out of and going into new modes of thought, and a person who is on hand to help you make a transition out of progressive mythology into a more traditional mythology is going to be very helpful to you. But if you never move beyond that point to other ideas, well, I don't think that's very helpful. So I'm more concerned with building the new thing, even though I think there is a very important role for people ushering others out of the old progressive mindset. All that said, this constant feedback loop of looking at your identity and reassessing it and determining who is privileged and not privileged is very tiring on the people who are locked in it. What traditional mythology, what traditional storytelling has to offer in place of the progressive myth and progressive storytelling is rest. This is a concept that I think is going to be very important if we want to convince people that the mythology we offer has a better moral foundation than the mythology that progressives have to offer. Richard C. Meyer, or Ya Boy Zach, was a great influence on me when I started this channel. One of the things that he often talked about in the comic storytelling that he enjoyed so much was baseball episodes of the X-Men series. This was a reference to a writer by the name of Chris Claremont, who would take some time off between major story arcs to show the X-Men just playing baseball with each other. They had a moment to rest and recuperate in between their major adventures and to get to know each other again after major character changes. These are very important moments in life. The times when you gather together with family and friends and you refresh yourself. And while you can't tell a story entirely about them, unless you're slice of life manga, I guess, you can include them in your stories to show that your characters have hit a plateau and they have a moment to refill and restock and recharge their batteries. If you look at Avengers Age of Ultron, almost everyone cites as their favorite scene in that movie a moment when the Avengers are all sitting around a table just talking with each other, recuperating from a major mission they had just finished. They drink, they tell jokes, they enjoy each other's company, and we get to see them recharging their batteries. Now, Age of Ultron is not a particularly good story, nor is the Avengers franchise a shining example of avoiding progressive storytelling, especially as time went on. But that kind of real human interaction that provides rest and refreshment rather than focusing on identity and constantly evaluating it is not something that happens in progressive storytelling. Especially if you've read the comics, you know how true this is. These moments of downtime are opportunities to vent about oppression or joke about how they are going to turn the tables on their oppressors, or to thwart and subvert supposedly harmful stereotypes in some sort of gross and disgusting way. Moments of rest become moments of activism, the exact opposite of what they're supposed to be. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus said, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." Jesus Christ had a remarkable impact on Western culture, both as Savior and as a literary figure. Even among the people who did not engage with him as a spiritual figure, still reckoned with him as a mythological one. His response to the arrogant and demanding moral leaders of his time was to encourage people to follow his own path, one he strove to call them to in a spirit of humility and gentleness. Christianity, and the Western culture that spawned from it, is not always a gentle, tender-hearted thing. But in the face of wrathful, judgmental, and heavy-handed falsehoods proclaimed from the heights of government, education, culture, and mythology, we may find that the most effective way to fight back is not direct opposition, but rather the creation of these moments of calm, peace, and rest that people will not find anywhere else in the culture. The Western mythos was created out of a mythology very similar to what we had today, a mythology that was about powerful impersonal forces dragging people hither and yon with little chance for respite. Now that a similar mythology has reared its head, we can learn a great deal from the man that tore down the original pagan mythos with meekness and humility, promising rest to the overburdened. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.